The Dark Secret of the Winslow Orphanages. On a cold October evening, the old Blackwood Manor looks scary against the dark sky. This big Victorian house used to be beautiful and impressive. Now it looks broken and sad after many years of being empty. The camera moves slowly over the wild garden, showing rusty metal gates and broken stone angel statues that used to welcome visitors with their frozen smiles. A flying camera goes down through dead tree branches that have lost all their leaves to the autumn wind. The wind sounds like ghosts breathing through the property. The camera stops at a small old sign covered with plants. It says Winslow House for Children, started 1897. A black bird lands on top of the sign. It's dark. I seem to look right at the camera before it flies away. This makes us look at the mansion's broken windows. Dark holes watching from an old face. A woman's gentle voice starts to tell the story. Her voice sounds calm but also worried, matching the scary pictures we see. The story of the Winslow family and their group of orphanages starts like many stories of rich people helping others during America's golden age. A rich family who made money from railroads decided to help society by giving homes to the country's poorest children. But under this nice surface is one of the most scary, unsolved mysteries from the early 1900s. A mystery that stayed hidden for more than 100 years, just like the many victims. The picture changes to old brown photographs of a rich-looking family standing on mansion steps. A tall, serious man with a big mustache stands in the middle. He stands very straight, like a soldier. His hand rests on the shoulder of a woman sitting in front of him. Even in the stiff old photo, you can see she is beautiful. She has high cheekbones, clear eyes that look like they hide secrets, and a mouth that doesn't have the shy smile women were supposed to have back then. 3 children in fancy clothes stand around them like pieces on a chessboard, controlled by invisible hands. Theodore Winslow made his money in steel and railroads when America was growing fast. The woman telling the story continues. We see papers showing stock certificates and newspaper stories about railroads growing. Theodore was born poor in 1855. He had an amazing talent for finding good business deals. During the money crisis of 1873, when other business people were scared, he bought failing steel factories for very little money. When the economy got better, his businesses were perfectly ready to make money from the railroad boom that would change America. The screen shows old movies of steam trains and workers building tracks across huge landscapes. This was how America spread across the continent, built with metal and hard work. By 1895, Theodore was one of the richest men in New England. He had so much money it would be worth billions today. A man who started with nothing had become as rich as the Rockefellers, Carnegies, and Vanderbilts, America's new rich families. These weren't old families with titles. They were new rich people who got their money from business and being tough. The picture changes to a painting of Eleanor Winslow, the same woman from the family photo, but alone this time. She looks right at you with eyes that make you uncomfortable. His wife, Eleanor, came from a completely different world. She was born Eleanor Blackwood, the last person from one of Boston's oldest families. Her family came over on the Mayflower ship, but they had lost most of their money over the years. When she married Theodore in 1879, it was the perfect American marriage, old family respect joining with new money. While Theodore built his business empire, Eleanor became known as a very smart woman with unusual interests. People knew her for wanting to help society, which was strange for rich people then. But she was also very interested in the new sciences about how people grow and inherit things from their parents. The screen shows Eleanor's picture next to photos of her going to science lectures and medical shows. A woman in fancy Victorian dress who somehow does look strange among men in professor robes. The camera slowly gets closer to Eleanor Winslow's face. Even though the photo is old and stiff, there's something in her eyes, a strong look that seems to reach through time, daring the viewer to understand what made her do what she did. She doesn't look like a bad person. And maybe that's the most scary thing, that someone who looks so normal, so human, could plan what was going to happen. What came next was bigger than anything before. The woman telling the story continues as the screen shows a map of the northeastern United States. Pins appear one by one, showing where each new orphanage was built. Over the next 15 years, the Winslow Charitable Foundation built 12 orphanages across New England and the Mid-Atlantic states. From Maine to Maryland, the Winslow name meant good care for orphan children. The camera moves across architect drawings and photos of buildings being built, showing big buildings of brick and stone rising from empty land, hundreds of workers climbing on scaffolds. The Winslow fortune turned into buildings and stone. Each place had lots of money, looked impressive, and had workers chosen by the Winslows themselves. These weren't like the crowded, poor state orphanages of that time. Winslow homes had private rooms, modern bathrooms, electric lights, and schools as good as the best private schools. Newspapers back then praised the family for being generous. They said this was how America's new rich people should act. A new expert appears on screen. The writing says Dr. Amelia Richardson, expert on American social help history. The difference with other child care places back then couldn't have been bigger, says Dr. Richardson, sitting in an office full of books. This was before laws against child labor, before anyone really watched orphanages. Many places back then were just workhouses where children as young as 6 had to work. It was normal for 30 to 40% of children to die from sickness, not enough food, and no one caring for them. Compared to this, the Winslow orphanages looked like heaven. Children had good food, good clothes, education, and looked healthy. The screen fills with newspaper titles from the early 1900s. Winslow opened 6 homes for orphan children. Rich man charity changes lives. Eleanor Winslow, America's Angel of Mercy. The newspapers loved them, almost worshipped them. Dr. Richardson continues. The Winslows were experts at controlling how people saw them. They often invited newspaper writers to visit their buildings. But these were always carefully planned visits to certain areas, always showing the same group of healthy, smart children who would say wonderful things about how they were treated. Looking back, we can see these were fake orphanages, showing a false reality that hid what was really happening in areas visitors never saw. But behind these happy newspapers was a scary truth that wouldn't be found until much later. The woman telling the story says, her voice getting sadder as the music changes to sound scarier. Between 1897 and 1912, records show that over 3,000 children went through the doors of Winslow orphanages. They came from everywhere, children whose parents died in factory accidents, from disease, from being poor. Children given up by parents who couldn't feed them when times were bad. Children from other countries whose parents died on the ship to America or soon after arriving. The screen shows photos of children coming in, row after row of serious young faces, each with number pinned to their clothes. Their faces show fear, giving up, or fighting back. Of those 3,000 children, the woman continues, her voice now almost whispering, not one single child could be found after entering the system. The music changes, getting tense and strange as the screen freezes on the children's faces. Each photo slowly fades to black one by one, until the screen is dark. No adoption papers, no death certificates, no census records, no marriage papers, no military records, no property papers, nothing. It's like these 3,000 children just disappeared. The darkness changes to a modern shot of an old woman sitting in a comfortable living room, surrounded by books, papers, and a laptop computer. Her silver hair frames a face with lines from age, but her eyes are bright and smart. Words on screen say she is Dr. Margaret Holbrook, historian, writer of America's Missing, the Winslow Orphanage Mystery. What makes this disappearance so amazing is how big it is. Dr. Holbrook explains, leaning forward seriously, we're not talking about a few missing papers or mistakes. We're not talking about children who got lost in paperwork or who changed their names and couldn't be found. We're talking about thousands of children who went into these places and then completely disappeared from all historical records. She stands up and walks to a wall covered in photos and papers. Her research is shown in a web of connections and questions. I've spent 30 years studying historical disappearances and things that can't be explained, she continues, pointing to the wall. The closest thing might be the lost colony of Roanoke, but that was only about 115 people. Nothing this big has been recorded before or since in American history. And what makes it even more amazing is how well these disappearances were hidden from people knowing about them for over 100 years. Dr. Holbrook picks up a photo of a young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing early 1900s clothes. This is Robert Campbell, who went to the Winslow home in Portland, Maine in 1902. His parents died in a factory fire. His entry papers say he was very healthy, did better than average on school tests, and was described as happy and well-behaved. 6 months after this photo was taken, papers say he was moved to another building for special education, something often written in Winslow records. No such move can be proven. There is no other record of Robert Campbell anywhere. She puts the photo back and picks up another, a teenage girl with serious eyes. Catherine Donovan, age 14, entered in 1905. Parents died of tuberculosis. Written down as very smart and good for advanced learning. Disappeared 8 weeks after coming in. Alice Jenkins, age 6, entered 1908. She continues, each photo showing another lost child, another life erased from history. The scene changes to a small-town library where a middle-aged man with glasses carefully handles old leather record books in a special room with controlled temperature. The space has filing cabinets and boxes for storing old things, keeping local history safe with obvious care. James Porter, Millfield Historical Society. The caption reads as the man looks up from his work. What makes this case so frustrating is how careful the first paperwork was. Porter says, turning pages of neat handwritten entries. Every child who went into a Winslow orphanage had their picture taken, was measured, and had their life details written down in amazing detail, their names, birthplaces, why they were orphans, medical histories, school tests, all kept with remarkable care. He points to specific entries, exact handwriting recording heights, weights, vaccination records, teeth exams, even head measurements along with each child's personal history. The amount of detail goes way beyond what was normal for orphanages back then. He continues. It looks more like scientific record-keeping than social welfare paperwork. Each child got a special identification number that followed them through the system. They were regularly examined and checked with detailed notes on how their bodies and minds were developing. And then nothing, no records of where they went after. Porter carefully closes the book and takes off his glasses, cleaning them thoughtfully before continuing. Normally, there would be papers for leaving, adoptions, moves to other places, jobs for older children, or death certificates for those who got sick and died. Every child would have a written outcome. But in the Winslow system, these records just stop. It's like they made this fancy system to track these children for some reason other than helping them. And once that reason was done, the children didn't matter anymore. The camera moves across rows of these entry records, each with photos and personal details of children from babies to teenagers. Page after page of lives written down and then abandoned. The mystery might have stayed hidden forever if not for one determined family researcher looking for a great-grandfather in 2010. The narrator continues. Catherine Reeves was researching her family history when she found out that her great-grandfather, William Reeves, had been put in the Winslow Home for Boys in Philadelphia in 1903 when he was 7 years old. But even after lots of searching, she couldn't find any record of what happened to him after he went in. This led her to connect with other family researchers and historians who soon found the same pattern across all 12 Winslow places. The scene changes to a middle-aged woman with reddish-brown hair, sitting at a computer, surrounded by family photos and papers. Catherine Reeves, family researcher, the caption says, "I just want to know what happened to my great-grandfather." She says, her voice full of emotion. "I never expected to find something this big. The more I looked, the more I realized that every child who went into these orphanages just disappeared from records. It doesn't make sense." The screen changes to show a map of the northeastern United States with 12 points lit up showing where the Winslow orphanages were, from Maine to Maryland. To understand this mystery, we need to look more closely at the Winslow family. The narrator continues. Theodore and Eleanor had 3 children. Frederick, the oldest, born in 1880, Victoria, born in 1883, and Charles, the youngest, born in 1885. Formal pictures of each child appear on screen as they're mentioned. From what everyone says, they grew up with amazing privileges, taught by private teachers before going to famous universities. Frederick studied at Harvard, Victoria at Radcliffe, one of the few places offering higher education to women then, and Charles at Yale. They were being prepared to take over not just the family's businesses, but also their charity foundation. The scene changes to another historian, a younger man standing in front of a big university building. Dr. Robert Chun, professor of American history, Harvard University, reads the caption. What's really interesting about the Winslow children is how completely they accepted their parents' charity work. Dr. Chin explains, in a time when many rich kids were known mainly for spending money and going to parties, the younger Winslows were actively involved in orphanages. There are many stories of them visiting the places, watching operations, even personally interviewing possible staff members. This wasn't charity from far away. The camera moves across photos showing well-dressed young adults, probably the Winslow children, talking with groups of orphans in formal settings. The first sign that something might be wrong came in 1908. The narrator continues as the scene changes to show an old yellow newspaper article. A local doctor in Baltimore, near one of the orphanages, wrote a letter to the health department. He was worried about how many children he was told had died of tuberculosis at the Winslow home. Dr. James Morrison asked for inspection, saying that the number of deaths seemed too high. The camera zooms in on a part of the letter. I have been told about at least 14 deaths in just the past month. This number seems impossible, even with the current sickness going around. What happened next started a pattern that would happen again whenever questions came up about the Winslow orphanages. Within 2 weeks of sending his letter, Dr. Morrison got a visit from Charles Winslow himself, along with 2 people from the Baltimore Health Department. They showed him detailed medical records for each case, complete with death certificates signed by the orphanage's doctor, Dr. Edwin Porter. The screen shows copies of these medical records and death certificates, all with the same doctor's signature. Dr. Morrison later said he was happy with the explanation, even impressed by how thorough the orphanage's medical rules were. He took back a complaint. The camera returns to Dr. Holbrook in her living room. This is where things get really strange, she says, shaking her head slightly. Because when my research team tried to find these children's burial records or death certificates in Maryland state files, they just weren't there. The copies shown to Dr. Morrison were never officially filed with the state. And Dr. Edwin Porter, the doctor who supposedly signed these certificates, we can find no record that such a doctor was ever allowed to practice medicine in Maryland or any other state. The music gets more scary as the camera moves across old photos of the Baltimore orphanage, stopping on the faces of children who would soon disappear from history. Similar things happened in Connecticut in 1909 and Massachusetts in 1910. The narrator continues. Local worries about missing children or strange activities of the orphanages always got the same response. A personal visit from someone in the Winslow family, along with what seemed like perfect paperwork, and often a generous gift to local groups. In each case, the questions were dropped. The scene changes to an old photo of a group of well-dressed men sitting around a fancy dinner table. The Winslows weren't just rich, they were connected. Theodore Winslow regularly had senators, judges, and police chiefs at his estate. His yearly hunting trips included some of the most powerful men in America. When the Winslow family wanted something handled quietly, they had the power to make it happen. The camera moves to show an old journal open to show handwritten entries. In 1911, a nurse named Sarah Mitchell started working at the Winslow home in Providence, Rhode Island. Unlike most staff, she hadn't been personally chosen by the family, but was brought in temporarily during a scarlet fever outbreak. During her 3 months working there, she kept a journal that gives us one of the few insider stories of life inside a Winslow orphanage. The camera shows pages in the journal as a different woman's voice reads parts. April 14, 1911. Got to Winslow home today. Building is impressive, much better than any hospital I've worked in. Children seem well fed and have good clothes. Staff very formal, almost too much so. Matron Mrs. Winters watched me all the time during training. April 27, 1911. Something strange today. 3 children were taken to the East Wing for special checkups by Dr. Lambert. When I offered to help, was firmly told my help wasn't needed. Children didn't come back to their sleeping rooms tonight. May 2nd, 1911. Asked Mrs. Winters about the 3 children. told they had been moved to the Winslow home in Boston, where treatment for their condition is better. No one mentioned this might happen when they were taken for checkups. May 18, 1911. More children taken to East Wing. 5 this time. Always the healthiest ones, which seems strange if they need special medical care. June 3, 1911. Mentioned my worries to Dr. Lambert today about moving children without proper paperwork. He got quite upset. Said all paperwork was handled by the office and that I should focus on the scarlet fever cases. Later found Mrs. Winters going through my personal things in the staff rooms. June 10, 1911. Something is very wrong here. Counted beds and sleeping rooms. 17 children have disappeared since I got here, all supposedly moved. No new children have come even though Mrs. Winters mentioned expecting new arrivals several times. Tomorrow I plan to... The journal entries end suddenly. The narrator's voice returns. The last entry in Sarah Mitchell's journal stays unfinished. According to work records, she left the orphanage the next day, June 11, 1911, without warning. No other record of Sarah Mitchell exists. No census entries, no marriage certificate, no death certificate, like the children she had worried about. She simply disappeared. The scene changes to a modern police station where a serious-looking detective looks at old files. Detective Michael Torres, Cold Case Unit, Rhode Island State Police. The caption says, "We opened the investigation again into the Winslow Orphanages in 2015 after Dr. Holbrook's book brought national attention to the case." Detective Torres explains, "The time limit doesn't apply to certain crimes, including murder, and the size of the disappearances certainly needed a fresh look. What we found, or rather, what we didn't find, was disturbing." He points to the files in front of him. Normally, even from 100 years ago, we would expect to find some paper trail, death certificates, adoption records, transfer papers between places. But it's like someone carefully removed every trace of these children from official records. And not just the children. Dozens of staff members seem to have disappeared too. How thorough it would suggest money and power that go well beyond what even a rich family should have been able to do. The camera moves across photos of the 12 Winslow orphanages when they were new, big brick and stone buildings with perfect gardens. Between 1897 and 1912, the Winslow Charitable Foundation spent what would be over $400 million in today's money building and running their orphanages. The narrator explains, a huge amount for charity work back then. Where did all that money really go? And what really happened inside those walls? The scene changes to show architect plans and blueprints of the orphanages. One disturbing clue comes from looking at the original building plans for the orphanages. The narrator continues. In 2017, a research team from Boston University managed to find complete blueprints for 5 of the 12 buildings. What they found has disturbing meanings. The camera zooms in on parts of the blueprints as a new expert starts to speak. Dr. Elena Vasquez, building historian, Boston University. The caption reads, "These buildings were designed with features that seem strange or orphanages." Dr. Vasquez explains, pointing to specific areas of the blueprints. Big basement levels with unusual strengthening, separate water and electrical systems for different wings, extra large furnace rooms. And in 3 of the 5 sets of plans we looked at, there were hidden passages connecting the office areas to the children's sleeping rooms, passages not visible from the main hallways. She looks right at the camera, her face serious. Most worrying were the changes made to the original designs. In every case, the plans were changed to add bigger basement areas after building had already started. Theodore Winslow personally approved these changes at a lot of extra cost. The music becomes more intense as the camera moves across old photos of basement doorways and hallways. But maybe the most scary evidence comes from the final days of the Winslow orphanage system. The narrator says, in June 1912, a fire started at the Winslow home in Hartford, Connecticut. The fire began in the middle of the night and spread unusually fast. By morning, the building was completely destroyed. Historical photos of what happened after the fire fill the screen, blackened ruins, firefighters, and people watching gathered around the smoking remains. Official reports said 17 people died, 12 children and 5 staff members. However, entry records showed that 73 children should have been living there at the time, along with 22 staff. The difference was explained by a statement from Victoria Winslow, who told authorities that most children and staff had been moved the day before for planned renovations. The camera zooms in on a newspaper photo of Victoria Winslow talking with officials at the fire scene. Her face is calm, but her body looks stiff. No paperwork of this move was ever found. No one came forward to say they had received the moved children or staff. Once again, dozens of people had disappeared without a trace. The scene changes to show headlines from the summer of 1912. Second Winslow Orphanage burns in mystery fire. Fire destroys Philadelphia Winslow home. Investigation started. Third Winslow Orphanage lost a fire. Arson suspected. Within 2 months of the Hartford fire, 3 more Winslow orphanages were destroyed by fire. In each case, the official death count was surprisingly low, with the Winslow family saying that most residents had been moved before the fires. By September 1912, the remaining 8 orphanages had been quickly closed, with all children supposedly moved to other places. The camera shows a formal picture of Theodore Winslow in his later years, his face stern and hard to read. Theodore Winslow died of a stroke in October 1912, just weeks after closing the final orphanage. His funeral was attended by senators, a Supreme Court justice, and even the Vice President of the United States. Newspaper tributes praised his charity work, with only a few mentions of the unfortunate series of accidents that had hurt his charitable works. The screen shows a fancy Winslow family tomb, a big structure of marble and granite. Eleanor Winslow lived only 4 months after her husband died, dying from what was called nervous exhaustion in February 1913. Their children, Frederick, Victoria, and Charles, inherited one of the biggest fortunes in America. Within a year, all 3 had left the United States, moving to Europe just months before World War I started. Photos appear showing the Winslow children in European settings: Frederick in London, Victoria in Paris, Charles in Switzerland. The Winslow siblings never came back to America. They lived their whole lives in luxury across Europe. Stay away from the country where their family had built and lost its reputation. None of them ever married or had children. The last living sibling, Victoria, died in Geneva in 1972 at age 89, taking whatever secrets she had to her grave. The scene returns to Dr. Holbrook in her living room. The most unsettling part of this case is not just that the children disappeared, she says, but the careful effort that went into erasing them from history. Someone went to amazing lengths to remove these children from records that should have been stored in many places. This wasn't just carelessness or bad record keeping. This was deliberate and organized. The camera changes to modern-day shots of the places where the Winslow orphanages once stood. Some are now parks. Others have new buildings. A few are still abandoned. In 2018, digging for archaeology started at the site of the original Winslow orphanage in Millfield. The narrator explains. What researchers found under the ruins shocked the historical and forensic communities. The scene shows an archaeological dig happening with researchers carefully digging an area behind what would have been the orphanage's main building. Dr. Thomas Wright, forensic archaeologist, University of Massachusetts, appears on screen. "We weren't expecting to find much," Dr. Wright explains, standing at the edge of the dig. "Our ground radar had shown some strange structures under what would have been the courtyard area. So we were first looking for building features not shown on the original plans. What we found instead were human bones." The camera shows carefully marked digging areas with researchers carefully recording their findings. "So far, we found the bones of 47 people from this site alone," Dr. Wright continues, his face serious. "All children ranging in age from about 3 to 16 years. Most disturbing is that many show evidence of operations that have no medical purpose. We can see exact cuts on the skull and spine, evidence of tissue and organs being removed. Strange changes to the long bones. These weren't medical treatments. They were something else completely." The camera moves across laboratory tables where researchers examine small bones with great care. Dr. Sarah Keller, forensic anthropologist, a new expert, is introduced. "The exactness of the changes to these bones is what's most unsettling," Dr. Keller explains. pointing to specific features visible under magnification. These weren't rough procedures. They were done with advanced tools and a lot of knowledge about the body. Some of the techniques seemed to have been experiments, testing different ways, different methods of reaching certain parts of the body. She pauses, clearly upset by her own findings. Based on the evidence, these children didn't die naturally. They went through organized procedures that no real medical practice would allow, especially on children. The scene changes to Detective Torres at the police station. After the discoveries in Millfield, we got warrants to investigate the sites of 3 other former Winslow orphanages, he explains. At each place, we found similar bones, though in different numbers. We're dealing with what seems to be one of the biggest cases of organized child murder in American history. The camera shows investigators at multiple sites, the sad work of recovery continuing. But the question remains, why? The narrator asks as the scene changes to a university library where researchers look through old documents. What purpose could possibly explain such organized abuse and murder of children? The answer may be in understanding the other activities of the Winslow family during this time. A new expert appears on screen, Dr. William Foster, historian of science and medicine, Johns Hopkins University. The late 1800s and early 1900s were a crucial time in medical research. Dr. Foster explains. Germ theory was pretty new. Transplant surgery was just starting. Understanding of how humans develop and how the brain works was basic by today's standards. And the ethical rules that control medical research today just didn't exist. He points to medical textbooks and journals from that time. What we do know is that Theodore Winslow, despite his public image as a businessman and charity giver, had a deep interest in medical research. He gave lots of money to medical schools and research institutes. And most telling, in 1895, 2 years before opening his first orphanage, he started the Winslow Institute for Advanced Biological Studies, a private research place staffed by doctors and scientists brought from around the world. The camera shows photos of an elegant stone building surrounded by perfect grounds with a group of serious-looking men in formal clothes standing on its steps. The Winslow Institute operated with almost no oversight. Dr. Foster continues. Its work was never published in regular medical journals. Its researchers never went to scientific conferences. Yet it used huge amounts of money and employed dozens of specialists who basically disappeared from the scientific community once they joined the institute. The scene changes back to Dr. Holbrook. When you put these pieces together, the orphanage is collecting thousands of children, those children disappearing, the Winslow Institute doing secret research, and now finding bones showing evidence of surgical experiments, a horrible picture appears, she says. These orphanages weren't charity places. They were providing human subjects for experiments on a huge scale. The music grows sadder as the camera moves across photos of the orphaned children, their faces serious, their fates now becoming clear. But even this terrible conclusion doesn't explain everything we found. The narrator continues. The number of bones found at the orphanage sites is only a small percentage of the children who disappeared. What happened to the rest? The scene changes to another expert, Dr. Rebecca Cohen, medical historian, Yale University. There's a disturbing possibility that comes from the broken records we've managed to find from the Winslow Institute. Dr. Cohen explains. It seems they were especially interested in tissue compatibility and rejection, basic ideas in transplant medicine, but decades before the first successful human organ transplant happened. She points to diagrams and notes found from the Institute's files. The patterns we're seeing suggest they were doing lots of testing to find compatible donors among the orphanage children, basically treating them as a living tissue bank. The most disturbing idea is that they may have been taking organs and tissues to put into rich patients. The camera zooms in on a partial document that mentions successful integration of donor tissue and extended survival of recipient. The technology for successful organ transplants didn't exist then. Dr. Cohen continues. But that doesn't mean they weren't trying. And given the resources they had, they may have made progress that wasn't shared with the wider medical community. Progress built on terrible suffering. The scene changes to show elegant homes and social gatherings of the rich elite of the early 1900s. During this same time, the Winslow social circle included some of the richest and most powerful people in American Europe, the narrator explains. Aging business leaders, nobles with family fortunes, politicians at the end of their careers. Many of them would have been very interested in living longer or treating conditions that medicine today couldn't fix. The camera moves across photos of fancy parties at the Winslow estate. The guests old but expensively dressed, their faces showing privilege and thinking they deserved everything. Records show that the Winslow Institute had private treatment rooms in a separate wing. The narrator continues. Visitors would arrive secretly, stay for days to weeks, and leave with no public record of their visit. Among the Institute's visitors were at least 3 senators, a governor, several European nobles, and many business leaders. All aging, all rich, all willing to pay huge amounts for treatments they couldn't get anywhere else. Detective Torres appears again, looking troubled. We found financial records suggesting payments to the Winslow Foundation that are much bigger than normal charity donations, he explains. Some people made contributions of what would today be millions of dollars, often at the same time as their visits to the Institute. These weren't donations. They were payments for services. The scene shows researchers looking at ledgers and financial documents. The size of this operation was amazing, the narrator says. Thousands of children processed through the orphanages. Hundreds of staff members involved at different levels. Dozens of rich clients getting experimental treatments. All of it hidden behind a fake charity that fooled a whole nation for 15 years. Dr. Holbrook returns to the screen. What makes this case so important to understand, beyond just how horrible it is how it shows the darkest possibilities of wealth and power operating without anyone watching, she says. The Winslows created a system where children, society's most vulnerable members, could be used, experimented on, and thrown away without consequences. And they almost got away with it completely. The camera returns to the archaeological dig in Millfield, where work continues as researchers find more bones. In 2023, the investigation expanded to include the grounds of the former Winslow estate. The narrator explains. Using ground radar and dogs trained to find bodies, investigators found many areas of interest across the 200-acre property. The screen shows teams working carefully across wooded grounds, marking areas for digging. What they found suggests that the estate itself may have been the final place for many of the missing children. The narrator continues as the camera shows forensic teams carefully digging a large area. So far, investigators have found the bones of over 300 people buried in unmarked graves on the property, most of them children, but also including adults who may have been orphanage staff members. Detective Torres appears again, standing at the edge of the dig site. This is now officially the biggest mass grave found in modern American history. He says, his voice tight with controlled emotion. And based on the radar surveys, we've only dug up about 20% of the possible burial areas on the property. The final count could be in the thousands. The scene changes to a laboratory where researchers examine recovered items, small personal things found with the bones. Dr. Jennifer Oakes, forensic scientist, a new expert, is introduced. We're finding personal items with some of the bones, hair clips, buttons, sometimes jewelry or religious medals. Dr. Oakes explains, showing several small items carefully kept in evidence containers. We're hoping these might help us identify some of the victims, especially when combined with DNA analysis and the detailed entry records from the orphanages. The camera shows a team working with computers and laboratory equipment.